Dude, I bit my lip yesterday, so if I speak like an idiot, that's probably why. I mean, at least more than usual. But let's talk about some Xenoblade Chronicles, and one of the, funnily enough, biggest critiques I have seen of Xenoblade 3 over the last year or so are the supposed number of plot holes that the game has. Now, I have my own critiques of Xenoblade 3, I've made no secret about that, but funnily enough, the plot holes aren't one of them, so how about we all just sit back, get a nice tasty beverage, I got some liquid H2O, and let me go to bat for Xenoblade 3 here. Only difference is, unlike Shohei Ohtani, I'm not getting 700 million from this. So there's quite a few of them that people bring up, but I'm only going to mention the ones off the top of my head, and they namely deal with the very, early moments of Ionios. Like the ages of the characters within Ionios, how does the timeline all work with Rex and Shulk being there 500 years ago. I think a lot of the plot holes that people bring up in regards to Xenoblade 3 kind of deal with aspects not important or relevant to the actual narrative and the theme of Xenoblade 3. There's a world out there where we get complete contextual analysis of Ionios and how it operates, and how all the timeline works and all that. I just don't think it's important to the actual story of Xenoblade 3, or to the overarching story of Xenoblade. Ionios to me is a throwaway world. It's a location that exists solely to tell a singular message, which was told at the end of Xenoblade 3, and for them to be like, turn to the next chapter of Xenoblade so we can continue the overarching narrative of Xenoblade. Like, another one is the status or what exactly happened to Numa and Logos. We assume, it's pretty much borderline confirmed with Future Redeemed. By the way, spoilers ahead, that Logos is in the Blade of the End, or whatever the hell they call End Sword, specifically the purple one, and that Numa's core crystal is in the Fist of the End. That one was shown. But what was the reasoning behind putting their core crystals in those weapons to begin with, instead of just having Malos and Numa out and about? I feel like Logos is obvious, he's a villain. He'd probably burn the entire world down before he can actually achieve our objective. But Numa's tends to be the one people get more stuck up on, and it's another one of those cases where I just don't think it's all that plot relevant to the actual story of Xenoblade 3. I think, funnily enough, when it comes to the overarching plot and theme of Xenoblade 3, they kind of covered all of their bases. There's not much of a need to extrapolate on anything else that will bolster the narrative of Xenoblade 3, in my opinion. And there's possibly multiple reasons as to why Numa's core crystal went into the Fist of the End. Maybe Numa died, quote-unquote, within the confines of Ionios. We'll come back right afterwards. But just so her core crystal's not going to waste, just slap it into some fist weapons or whatever. Or they did the calculus backstage and realized, hey, if we put her into a weapon, then it's actually more beneficial to us for whatever reason. Maybe we can pass it down, or it lasts longer. We can just essentially kick the ball down the field, because this world's supposed to last forever. We can kick the ball down the field until someone comes around worthy enough to wield the weapon. Case in point with Matthew and then Noah. And while, yeah, some additional context for that would have been cool, I don't think it's pivotal to the actual narrative of going on with Future Redeemed and Xenoblade 3. With Future Redeemed, it just served as a reason as to why Matthew's fist weapons were so powerful. Oh, he has an Aegis core crystal in them. For the confines of Future Redeemed's plot, we don't need anything more than that for the story to work, and for it to be a cool reveal in the moment. For the story of Xenoblade 3, it recontextualizes a few things, kind of explains why Noah's sword is so powerful, not just the fact that it's the sword of the end, but he is controlling an Aegis core crystal, essentially. There's an even better thematic idea that I just realized as I was recording this, that in essence it also merges Xenoblade 1 and 2 in the confines of Noah as a character specifically, because Noah is a character from the world of Xenoblade 1. He is from Bionios. Not Bionios, I mixed up two names there, okay? He's from the world of the Bionis, but his weapon utilizes power from Allrest with the Aegis core crystal. So in essence, the protag of Xenoblade 3 is a combination of the two worlds from Xenoblade 1 and 2, which is what 3 is all about. And I think for the story of Xenoblade 3, him just having a cool sword is good enough. It doesn't need the exposition or the plot development that the Monado or the Aegis swords had in Xenoblade 1 and 2. You don't really need that for the story that was told in Xenoblade 3. With the recontextualization we got from Future Redeemed, that's more than sufficient, because the story wasn't necessarily all about the swords as a massive plot device, it was more so how Noah utilized the sword. And I think in that regard, it largely worked. So while, yeah, you can technically, if you want to get a little bit nitpicky, or if you really care about the details like that, argue that they should have gone to a little bit more detail about the origins of why Numa's core crystal is in the Fist of the End, or Logos' core crystal is in End Sword. But I think this comes into a position, or really an argument about what is necessary for the plot of Xenoblade 3, and honestly, I just don't think that exposition is strictly necessary, especially for a world like Ionios, that in my opinion exists solely as a throwaway world for Xenoblade 3. And when we're talking about the overarching timeline and story of Xenoblade, Xenoblade 3 merely serves as like a focal point for the series going forward. The world of Ionios on the grandest stage of them all is not all that relevant, but the themes that happened in Ionios, that will be relevant in my opinion. So I think a lot of the nitpicky details, some may say nitpicky, some may just say plot holes, from Xenoblade 3 are important to some people. I'm not going to try and like minimalize that or whatever, because we all have different preferences as what we like from a story, right? That just makes sense. But for me, it's not all that important to the actual plot and story of Xenoblade as a whole, but also Xenoblade 3 specifically. I think Xenoblade 3 would have benefited from some longer scenes, especially in the back end. I would have preferred the game to be like 10 chapters in total, in my opinion, but this isn't necessarily what I'm talking about when I say stuff like that. Plot holes as a concept are also kind of interesting in terms of a critique discussion, because sometimes they can be kind of obvious and straightforward in your face, and hard to look past. They can almost leg sweep the plot from under it and minimalize a lot of aspects in regards to it. And what people define as a plot hole can kind of vary from person to person. Some may argue that suddenly Palpatine returns in Star Wars is a plot hole, some may just say that it's rushed and not that explained. You can look at all the plot holes that exist in, say, the modern Halo story, or in World of Warcraft and whatnot, and all the times World of Warcraft has had to like retcon its plot because they just fumbled the bag. And then there's other times with plot holes, like in Xenoblade 3 here, where, yeah, sure, they may exist, and maybe it would be cool if we got some, like, context for this or some explanation. I just don't think they're all that relevant or that impactful to the actual story quality of Xenoblade 3, at least in my opinion. I tend to find plot holes are more of a symptom in terms of how you react to the plot as a whole, because I feel like if you enjoy a story or a game overall, you're likely not to care all that much about the plot holes that may exist. Whereas if you already don't like the story for whatever reason, or you have some bias, a bias is not necessarily a bad thing, but you have some kind of bias against the story or the game, or you just plain out don't like it, then those plot holes may add on and further enhance your dislike for the game or the story. It's a bit of a spectrum, but I never really found myself not liking a game simply because of a plot hole or even a story. Even if the plot hole is really stupid, I can normally get over it if the actual events surrounding everything else or the game and the story are really good and fun and just interesting on the whole. But if I don't like a game for whatever reason, then the plot holes become far more relevant for me, and further my dislike for that game, like Halo 5. There's also some aspects to Xenoblade 3's story, getting back to Xenoblade here, that I think were introduced simply so they can be expanded on in the future, Light being one of those. In the Nia exposition cutscenes, you know how Xenoblade always has to have that one 10 to 15 minute section where it dumps about 3 hours of exposition on you within like 15 minutes? Yeah, don't worry, I never retained like half that information the first time around either. But funnily enough, one of the most important revelations in that section, in my opinion, is the fact that the building block for everything in the Xenoblade universe is light, and that they were able to utilize and manipulate light across worlds / dimension to be able to communicate between Bionis and Ulrest. And that is something that can just be a throwaway mechanic to explain how they had FaceTime to construct Origin, or it could be absolutely pivotal to the plot going forward. And there's a lot of mechanics and little nuances to Xenoblade 3's story that feels like they were seeds that they can sow in the future and harvest from if they so chose to. Mithra's kid probably being the most famous one, where we know 2 of Rex's kids, the third is still there. With Mithra's kid, that kid could be plot important, it could not be important, who knows? We just simply don't know right now, but it's like Schrödinger's important plot device. Either Mithra's kid is going to be like the protagonist of Xenoblade 4, or a throwaway character, or we just never even hear from them again. And that they exist solely for the picture, which I wouldn't even be that upset about, because again, it depends on where the story goes from here. What kind of theme they want to tackle, what kind of story they want to tell. And I talked about this a lot before, about all the evidence and signs, and them even straight up saying it, that Xenoblade is continuing, and how I personally think Xenoblade 4 is a follow-up, because there's a lot of hints in-game for that, and if you read between the lines or you just read the words of Takahashi, he kind of implies that there will be a follow-up in some way. There's a lot of things that were introduced in Xenoblade 3 that could become plot important in Xenoblade 4 in some form or fashion. We just simply don't know. They exist in this like temporarily limbo-esque state of importance and plot relevance, where they could be pivotal and absolutely shattering. Like the fact that Zed exists. The fact that human will, when enough people feel the same emotion on a great enough of a scale, that emotion or concept can coalesce and become manifest as a physical entity. That itself could be a massive point in the story going forward. It's not like someone whipped up Zed in a lab or something. No, people thought him into existence in the world of Xenoblade. That could be massively important. Or could just be a throwaway to explain Zed real quick. You see what I mean? It exists in this state where they could just easily say, oh yeah, the conditions don't ever exist again for that to happen. They could also go the way of, hey, you know the Zoha/Conduit? Yeah, so you know how we found it in the middle of a giant war with humanity tearing itself apart? Probably a lot of people were looking for a savior or some kind of divine salvation, and then all of a sudden some jabroni found it in the middle of the not the desert, but like near a lake, I believe, in Africa. Yeah, when you think about it through that lens, interesting how you can explain the Zoha with that. Could we do it again? Oh, you know how we had a mechanic for Xenoblade 3 called interlinking, where peoples from two different worlds manage to merge together, but they can't stay like that. They have to separate eventually, or they'll just like snuff themselves out of existence. Yeah, what if the world at the end of Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed, because we did kind of prove it with the final boss fight in Future Redeemed, that multiple people can actually interlink at the same time. What if the worlds themselves interlink, because we used kind of a similar animation and color palette for them to interlink, as we did with the planets in the post-credit scene? What if the plot of Xenoblade 4 is that the worlds actually interlinked at the end of Future Redeemed and Xenoblade 3, but remember, all interlinks must end or they snuff each other out. So like, what if the plot of Xenoblade 4 is to find a way to keep the worlds together permanently and undo that nasty side effect of interlinking? Yeah, what if that was the plot? Do you see how like these little small details of Xenoblade 3 can either be viewed as a plot hole or as a throwaway within the confines of Xenoblade 3, but can easily be expanded on in the future to become massively significant? That's what I'm really getting at here when it comes to Xenoblade 3. I think either the plot holes tend to be not that important to the actual overarching narrative of Xenoblade, or even for Xenoblade 3's story, and only exist to flesh out Ionios, which already exists as a throwaway world we are not supposed to get that much invested in and be willing to walk away from, which is the theme of Xenoblade 3 to begin with. Or their narrative seeds to be sown that Monolith can utilize in the future to varying degrees of importance. There's a lot under the table, and a lot of tools and essentially mechanics that Monolith have incorporated into the franchise that will seem like everything is long-term built, and just essentially give them narrative options going forward, which I think is a pretty cool spot to be in. Give them the tools available to them right now, and let their imagination or inspiration down the line be able to run with it. I'm cool with that, in my opinion. I think that's also why the plot holes or plot devices of Xenoblade 3 never really bothered me all that much. To me, they were either not that important or could easily be explained later on in the franchise. Because I didn't buy for a second, even at the end of Xenoblade 3, that this story was over. And I still don't think that. And with that, I will call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, until we meet again.